All right, so here we are on season 3, episode 7 of Global Impact. I'm your host, Michael Bociurkiw, but I have a very special, reintroduction. With me is the very charming Melissa Ricci, and she's our co-host now, like hopefully permanent co-host as we go forward in the weeks and months ahead, and the show evolves. So welcome back, Melissa. Good to have you.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I'm very excited. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I'm just enjoying it. So I love it. It's great. We get to talk about a lot of interesting subjects, and
Right.
it's amazing. It's connectivity, and
Yep. Yep. And we get to squeeze our networks together in social media, power out those messages on social media as well, which is
exactly.
what we're going to be talking about a lot today, the smartphone and social media addiction. Are you
Yeah.
addicted to your smartphone, Melissa?
What do you think?
You know, most of us are. Yeah. Right. Where's mine? Right here.
I mean,
Um,
guilty as charged.
right.
I'm not even
So,
going to defend myself right now.
yeah.
No, of course I
I know.
am. Yeah.
Yeah, and we're going to be talking to an expert today also about how COVID-19 has exacerbated all of that, all of the screen time that most of us has been on. But
Yeah.
tell me, so you've been traveling a bit. What was your traveling experience there up in the air? Because a lot of people are still grounded, so probably want to hear
Mm.
what you're seeing there.
Yeah, it's been like interesting. I had anxiety because I don't know, I still don't feel comfortable. I think people are starting to relax a little bit because of the
Hmm.
vaccine, and they're thinking, okay, well, the vaccine is fixing everything and they're okay, but it's not okay. You still have to wear your mask and you still have to be on top of things because things can change at any time. I mean, look at France, they're on lockdown right now.
Right.
So I because I know that things are not yet sorted, I was very careful. And I mean, my flight was very fast. I was flying to Texas, so I was okay. But
Yeah. Yeah.
it's still not normal. We
Yeah.
still have to be careful. Yeah.
Sure, absolutely. And, you know, it seems to me because things are worsening here in Canada, and we were actually way ahead of the United States and many other countries, but now we have
Yeah.
a worse case number per capita than the United States, and big parts of Canada are going into lockdown. And we have all
Mm,
three of the variants of concern here. And it almost
mm.
seems, Melissa, that the virus
Yeah.
is outsmarting us at every corner. It's just
it's
really,
it's mutating, and that's what's
yeah,
worrying here, is that it's like a never ending story. It's like at the moment when we think we've got it, there's a new
yeah,
mutation. This virus is very smart, so I think
yeah,
we're gonna have to outsmart the smart
right.
virus. Talking about smart
Exactly.
smartphones.
Yeah. So we got that going on. And then also
What
big
else?
news
Yeah.
this week as well. And actually, the United States just announced new sanctions today. Lots and lots of tension on the Ukraine-Russia border. I was writing about it this week on for CNN and
Yeah, you've been very
commenting.
busy
Yeah,
about, yeah,
yeah.
you've been like all over the news. I was trying to keep up, but I just, yeah, can you tell me a bit what's
Well,
happening
so
here? What's your,
basically, the conflict started in 2014 when Russia illegally annexed Crimea and then invaded other parts of eastern Ukraine. It's been
uh,
kind of simmering since then, but nonetheless, 14,000 killed, millions displaced, billions of dollars of damage to infrastructure in eastern Ukraine.
right.
So, in the past, well, since March,
Mm,
Russia has been building up its presence. So, if you add
mm,
the arrival of the new troops as well as those that were already there, we're talking about 35 or 36% of total Russian ground forces in the border regions of Ukraine. So no one knows what's going to happen next. But the big fear, of course, is they're going to try and do another land grab or force themselves into eastern Ukraine some more and
yeah.
put in so-called peacekeepers that look like a peacekeeping force, but they're not.
Mm, mm.
But you know, these sanctions today that the U.S. announced, their coordination with the Europeans, they're quite harsh.
Yeah.
Having said that, I see our guest is ready to come into
It's
our
already here.
little house here. Wow.
Hello.
Oh, wow.
Professor Larry Rosen. My goodness, welcome. Where are you?
I'm in front of Dodger Stadium, actually.
We won't keep you long then. We don't want to interrupt your game.
No, the game's not on.
Anyway, Larry, great to have you. Welcome very much to Global Impact. Thanks for making time. And I should introduce you to my wonderful co-host, Melissa Ricci, who's also
Hi.
up the road from you in Los Angeles. And
Okay.
Yeah, it's further down. You're in
Yeah.
San Diego, right?
Yes. Well,
Yeah,
northern
okay.
San Diego. Where are you in Los
Northern?
Angeles?
West Hollywood.
Okay. I grew up in
Mhm.
LA, so
Oh, well, then you know.
I grew up in
You've been here.
I grew up in the San Fernando Valley.
Oh, the Valley. Yeah, I know the Valley very well. I used to be in Studio City.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it's not far. I like the Valley. It's more laid, like laid back and
Yeah, I grew
yeah.
up in Van Nuys.
Yeah, it's too hot though in the summer. I mean, I escaped because it gets too hot, too cold and too hot.
Ah,
But yeah,
the bane of our existence, right?
I
well,
know. First world problem.
no matter where you two live, you're both stars in my mind. So
Oh,
Oh.
that's so sweet.
Well, I don't have the stage I'm behind though, so I have to keep up here. Just I feel a little bit like
Here,
left out.
I'll change mine.
Okay. It's fun. I try to use those things. It doesn't work on my computer. It's like a background. You can be in spape.
oh,
Oh,
wow. Oh, my goodness.
oh wow.
You're in the
It's getting
tropics now.
hot.
Yes.
Woo!
Time for a
It's
mojito.
matching my jacket.
Time for a mojito. Time for a tequila.
That's
Time for a
right.
drink.
It's, as they say, it's got to be 5 someplace.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
exactly.
I mean,
So,
you're traveling.
Professor Larry Rosen, let me introduce you to the wide world out there. Professor Larry Rosen is one of my favorite tech experts. He's a leading authority on smartphone and social media addiction, professor emeritus at California State University, Dominguez Hills, and past chair of the psychology department there. He is also a research psychologist, computer educator, keynote speaker, and is recognized as an international expert in the psychology of technology. In his latest book, The Distracted Mind, Ancient Brains in a High-Tech World, written with Adam Gazzaley, was published by MIT Press. And we actually met way back in 2018 when I was working on a book that, you know how it goes, it's still in progress, Digital Crack. And I sat in on 2 of your classes and we had long chats then about smartphone and social media addiction. And that's why I thought it'd be wonderful to invite you onto the program, because not only was it a big phenomenon there, it's even in some ways been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. So I heard from a previous podcast guest that screen time numbers are way up, especially among young people. And of course, a lot of that has to do with them being locked in, but also because of, the distance learning phenomenon. Can we start off? Can I ask you if there's any data you've seen that might indicate how severe or how bad the problem is now with increased screen time?
So we've been doing research actually pre-pandemic and during the pandemic. Obviously, there's no post-pandemic research yet.
Yeah.
But we've been putting an app on the phones of millennials and teenagers. Millennials since 2016. Let me think. Teenagers since 2019. And back in 2016, the app just measures how many times you unlock your phone each day and how many minutes you're on it. So it's very gross measures. Back in 2016, millennials were checking their phone about 50 something times a day, which seemed like a lot to us back then. And for 220 minutes, that seemed like a lot. And then just a couple of years later, it shot up to 75 times a day and 275 minutes. And for the teenagers, exactly the same thing. Now, most of this was pre-pandemic. What we've done during the pandemic, what we did is we collected data from millennials from screen time. Apple does a really nice job of putting out screen time for all of us to use to see what we're doing on our screens. Unfortunately, they don't let you download the data. So at the end of each week, we had each of our millennials take screenshots from screen time and send them to us. And so we've got data where you can imagine that's a ton of data. We have it for 8 weeks for about 50 people. So we're wading right into the middle. But what I can tell you is the numbers have exploded. 275 minutes would seem like nothing right now. We're looking at people, many of these millennials on 10, 12 hours a day. Now, I would argue that it's hard to disentangle that from schoolwork, from distance work, but we can, because we can see what apps are used the most. We can see when you unlock your phone, what app do you go to first? We can see how many notifications you get a day and where they come from. So we get a lot of rich data there. What you find as you start looking at them is that, yes, they're spending a lot of time, 10, 12 hours a day, but most of it's on communication, and particularly social media and text messaging turn out to be the biggest ones, but then followed by entertainment, which is in their minds, in Apple's minds, things like YouTube and videos and stuff like that. Very little for work, for productivity in their minds. So we're basically looking at the fact that these millennials are using their time to connect, which has been a big topic of conversation over the last year, because we're only connecting by looking at each other from here up. So we're missing all the cues from there down. And we're also on the positive side getting used to that. We're getting used to the fact that we get more stuff from people's faces now than we ever did before, because we're actually paying attention. And so it's kind of an interesting thing in the research. It's showing both good and bad. But we're going to come out of this, and it's going to be difficult, particularly for children. I work with a lot of parents of elementary school kids, and they all say the same thing. It's just so difficult to get my kid off the computer, off the screens. But I understand that they've been in school all day virtually, and they need a break, and this is a break for them, so they'll let them play Fortnite. So it's going to be interesting coming off of this to see where it goes from here, how good parents are going to get at monitoring it, how good teachers are going to get, how good the kids are going to get at self-monitoring. I was asked, I'm on the board of this group called Children and Screens, and we periodically do tips for parenting, and they wanted me to write one about tips for parenting, about what to do at the end of the pandemic. And I took the approach, I said, don't cut your kids off cold turkey, because they will get anxious and they will find a way to do it anyway. What you want to do is wean them off. And the way you do it is you keep track for a week or so and what they're doing, how many hours they're spending, what times they're spending it. And then you build a strategy that says, okay, we're going to remove this time to cut it down a little bit. Or we're going to, instead of giving you an hour and a half, we're going to give you an hour and 10 minutes. And we're going to slowly cut you down, because cold turkey detoxes don't work anyway. Cold turkey doesn't work. And then these kids are smarter than we are anyway, so they'll figure out how to get on.
Right. Yeah.
Way smarter.
It was interesting. Pre-pandemic, I would travel a lot, and I was, for example, in Singapore and in Ukraine, and both places, what I saw was a lot of empty playgrounds in the days where there were no lockdowns. And in Singapore, mothers would tell me, yeah, that's what, because our kids are upstairs in air-conditioned comfort on their screens, they're not playing outside. I'm wondering, because of all the lockdowns, the pent-up demand, whether there'll be a kind of counter-revolution, for lack of a better word, where the kids will, I want to be outside and I want to be out there playing with my kids. And I don't know, it'd be interesting.
I don't know. That's a really good question. I think that's one that is best answered by watching and seeing. I suspect, because of how long this has gone on, and will still go on, particularly for young kids, they're building up habits, and those habits are hard to break apart. As you well know, with kids, if you've had kids before, it's not easy parenting them and getting them to develop good habits for anything. But it's really easy to let them develop bad habits, as they will do, because that's kids' job, is to push the envelope and see what they can get away with. And they will continue to do that. I think the part of the problem is that the parents have also been stressed by their job, having to be home doing their job virtually when they're not used to that. They're used to having colleagues in the next desk, or the next cubicle or whatever, and they're used to having like meet at the water cooler kind of times, eating lunch together, having a cigarette together, whatever it is. that's all been gone. And there's no virtual cigarettes you can have. And the only way you can get breaks is by creating them yourself.
Yeah. Well, I have a question actually, since you're a professor and you're teaching, how the lockdown and remote learning has affected you, and is it like, do you miss teaching in front of people? What about you as a teacher? What's your, like, how did it affect you? Yeah.
So for the last 10 years of my teaching career, which I just retired from last year,
Oh, okay. I
for
didn't
the
know
last
that.
10 years of my teaching career, I basically taught one class.
Oh, okay.
And that was a class called The Global Impact of Technology. I think that's the one you heard me lecture.
Yeah,
Global
Michael,
Impact
yeah.
of Technology. And it had 400 or so students. But we had discussion. The students asked questions, made comments. I just made sure that they were in the first 5 rows of the theater in order to do that so I could hear them. I also taught along the way some senior seminar classes, which is a senior class that all seniors have to take one of 12 or 13 offerings. And mine was always on something having to do with technology, screen time, things like that. My last semester of teaching, I taught 2 online senior seminars and 1 big class online with 400 students. I hated it. I absolutely hated it. Part of the reason why I hate it, and I think Michael can tell you this, is that I play off the audience's energy. If the audience is sitting there being bored, then I'm bored too. I play off their energy, I play off their question. And even though they were allowed to ask questions when we're online, nobody does, quite honestly. And they all know that it's going to be taped and stored. And so they don't even need to watch it live. In fact, most of them didn't watch. We found out later through some of our, we just like mini research projects, those who watched it live dwindled throughout the semester until it was down to like 5 people watching out of 400 some odd. But the interesting thing is those that watched it on YouTube, almost all of them watched it at 1.5 or 2.0 speed, meaning they cut the lecture time in half basically. Now, I don't know how much you get from like boom, 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 like talking really quickly, but nonetheless, my grades for the last time I taught it were lower than ever before.
Interesting. And I remember we talked about multitasking when I attended your class, because I really noticed that you're right. You're really engaged with the students. You have great presentation. But I saw them, I watched them watching you. They had their laptops open. They had Facebook open. They had this open. They were doing a lot at the same time. And the research I saw, might have even come from you, indicates that a lot of people think they're a lot better at multitasking than they really are.
Right. The ones who think they're better at multitasking are actually worse at multitasking, it turns out. But the interesting thing is, if you are multitasking during a lecture, there's just tons of research on this. And you're looking at even if you're just taking notes on your laptop, there's this tendency to get distracted by what's on the rest of the laptop. And I've snuck behind them before when they're doing something, or had a student sneak behind them, and most of them have some sort of social media on.
Yeah.
In fact, it was funny. When years ago, when I was taking my daughter to visit campuses to see where she wanted to go after high school, we went to Harvard, and she was really into physics at that point. And so we went to a physics lecture. It's a big lecture hall, and there were about 8 people in the lecture hall. And we sat in the back, and every single one had Facebook on. Every single one. You cannot do that. You cannot multitask. I mean, and for those who don't believe that, just try watching any of those shows like CNN, where somebody's talking and there's a scroll bar on the bottom going this way or this way, and see if you can do both at the same time. It's impossible.
But is that true that the brain can only do one thing at a time?
In general, if one cognitive task, one task that takes a lot of brain power thinking, we can do automatic tasks easy. We can walk and chew gum, and we can walk and talk to people and not stumble, some of us.
Okay.
But what we can't do are 2 thinking tasks. And like CNN would be one thinking task of listening to Anderson Cooper say, and one thinking task of reading whatever's on the bottom scroll that's obviously a different topic too. So what you're really doing is task switching. You're bouncing from one to the next. And in general, what we find is you bounce so fast from one to the next that there's no time for you to thoroughly absorb it deep into your brain. So it just literally gets lost. So I can actually, if I'm trying doing that, I'm always watching the Dodger games on my phone while I'm watching the news. And if my wife says, "Can you tell me what that they just said on that story? Because I missed it." I said, "I don't know. I wasn't paying attention. I was focusing on the game and trying to double focus, but I know you can't do that." And
Yeah.
yet I was trying.
And then stuff happens subconsciously. Like I've heard that, a lot of us, when we're at the dinner table or say on a rare date, you put your phone, to be polite, upside down, push it away, but the brain still tries to check in with that smartphone, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we've done research, and there's just been a lot of research actually on this topic. And what they find is that if there is a smartphone available to you, meaning it's in front of you on your desk, it's in sight, it's the same effect as if it were out of sight. It's the same exact effect. And in fact, in some studies, it doesn't even matter whether it's your phone. It could be somebody else's phone. There's one interesting study where they have two people come in and they sit opposite each other. They don't know each other and they talk for 10 minutes about some personal topic that they're given. And in the meantime, there's either a phone or a little notebook that's the same size as a phone on a table that's maybe this far away behind them. Whether it's, and that phone is either just a random phone or it's one of the people's phones. At the end of the 10 minutes, if there's a phone there, they rate each other less empathic, less interesting, all these kind of negative connotations. And you're exactly right, Michael. What happens is that they're thinking about what's in their phone. They're thinking about it and thinking about it. And so they can't stop.
So that's an addiction base. It's like the same as wanting a cigarette, and with the electronics, like they try to replace it with electronic cigarettes, but the gesture, that doesn't go away. It's just there's something, the anxiety is still there because the core of the problem is not the cigarette in itself. It's why do you need that cigarette, right?
Exactly. The interesting thing about addiction is a very specific set of criteria. Now, there's no, in the diagnostic and statistical manual that all the psychiatrists and psychologists use, where you get the symptoms of each disorder, there is no online behavior disorder. There's no screen time disorder. There is online gaming disorder, which is in the last appendix, meaning that it'll probably be in the next one because they're trying to study it more. But what's interesting is when you talk about addiction, addiction is really very specific. Addiction is that you basically do a task and you get some sort of pleasure out of it. The pleasure comes from chemicals in something called the dopaminergic system, which is dopamine and a bunch of other things like serotonin and a few other chemicals. And what happens in addiction is the first time you do it, maybe you spend half hour doing the game and you feel good, feel a lot of pleasure, right? Second time you get to that half hour point and you don't feel the same amount of pleasure yet. So you have to do it another 15 minutes to get the same amount of pleasure. Same thing with cigarettes, right? It's like you smoke a cigarette and you feel good. The next time, maybe it takes you 2 cigarettes to feel that good. It's the same kind of addiction that you have. That's just a biochemical one. But what we find with people who are computer addicted is that it's very different than people with anxiety. This really has nothing to do with anxiety, actually. What it has to do with is it has to do with deriving pleasure from dopamine, deriving pleasure from the chemicals in our body that we've come to associate with feeling pleasure. Because there's nothing really in there that makes you feel pleasure, but we've associated it through our lives. Where anxiety comes in is something called obsession. And in our research, and I think in most of the stuff I've read over the years, obsession seems to be more about what's going on than addiction. And the reason is obsession is an anxiety-based disorder. And what we feel happens, and we've seen this in studies, is that when you are just kind of hanging around, doing things, your brain's always working. And one of the things that happens is we have a large amount of a presence on the internet. I mean, our presence is we have a text messaging presence, whether it's through text, through iMessage or WhatsApp or any of those things. We have an email presence. We have a social media presence, which is huge because the average millennial has an active, very highly active account on 6 social media sites. What that does is it builds up a social obligation. You feel like if you don't log in, you're letting people down, right? So if you don't log in, what happens is, so say you log into Facebook or you log into Instagram or whatever, and then you fulfill your social obligation, meaning you comment on things, you post things, you do whatever people do when they're doing that, then you get off. And then what happens is these chemicals start leaking into your brain. Chemicals are from an anxiety network. The most prominent one is cortisol. Most people have heard of cortisol. Cortisol is kind of the fight or flight chemical that it's in your system, and it gets more and more and more. And if you're really scared, if there's something happening, it's either going to make you leave or it's going to make you stay and fight. In milder amounts of cortisol, all it does is make you anxious, makes your palms sweat, things like that. What happens is that builds as more and more anxiety chemicals are dumped into you, that builds until you have to check in. You have to check those 6 social media sites. You have to check your text messages. You have to check in to get rid of the anxiety. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a totally different system though. So I look at it as kind of a sliding continuum here. On one side might be addiction, and on the other side might be obsession. And you can be anywhere in there at the same time. For example, if you're a gamer, you're probably way more towards the addiction side. If you're a heavy duty social media person, you're way more towards the obsession side. But we slide back and forth during the day because I think at any given time, we are putting out those chemicals that make us look or act addicted or obsessed.
Wow. And so you explained very well what happens
Yeah.
inside our brains. Now, how much to blame are, for example, the app developers or the platform developers? You and I talked before about the infinite scroll, about the alerts. Why are they in red? Why do they sound a certain way? There's quite a bit of sophistication there in trying to get us hooked, isn't it?
Yeah, sadly there is. App developers and website developers, anybody who wants your attention spends lots of money on figuring out how to get your attention. They always hire behavioral scientists. It's a lucrative job. You get a lot of money. And it ranges from designing the icon that's going to be on your phone to make it very attractive and very eye appealing. So it'll grab your eyeballs and keep them there. At least grabbing your eyeballs comes that way. Keeping it there is a different story. Obviously, there's the infinite scroll where sometimes I scroll Facebook and like you just keep going forever. You keep going back forever. There's things like Netflix where you finish one video and next one is starting in 5, 4, 3.
Exactly.
You got 5 seconds to make up your mind.
Yeah, it's like.
And it's running and you go, oh, well, I'll just watch another episode. That's how the part of binge watching is like you just keep going and going and going.
Yeah.
But there's lots of other tricks they use. They gamify their apps so that you win prizes. They have levels, just like any other video game where you try to strive to get to a certain level. There's just a million tricks that they have.
Hooks, they hook you.
Yeah, and yes, and the idea is to get your eyeballs there and keep them there. And it works. It really works. When you look at some of the data on this, there's 2 really good books out on this, by the way. One's called Attention Merchants and the other's called Hooked. They're both really excellent. One's by Tim Wu and one's by Nir Eyal. They both go a long way to explain. Nir Eyal goes a long way to explaining to business people how you can hook people. And then you write a book out of that after that says how you can get unhooked as a person. Attention Merchants, Tim just talked about basically all the tricks they use to get your attention and to keep it there. And they're very good at it. They're excellent at it.
Yeah.
Oh, there's also like Google is spying on you. I mean, all this AI, Siri, Alexa, all our best friends right now, they tend to, there was this theory that they're spying on us, and that if you talk about steak, we were talking with Michael about that yesterday, you mentioned steaks or, I don't know, shoes, the next day, all you would see is advertisement on shoes and meat.
And God forbid you go buy something from Amazon, because then the next day you're going to get all sorts of ads for better ones. Or don't leave anything in your cart in Amazon, because then you'll start getting all the ads all over the screen to remind you that it's in your cart.
Right. Yeah.
It's almost as though they're reading your mind and they know what you're looking for. There's less, it's less subtle than that, actually.
But didn't you say that AI is smarter now that, I mean, they know you better than you know yourself? Is that a quote from you, you're saying? Or maybe
There's,
not.
there is some AI, there's some very interesting AI research. One of the demonstrations was they had people take a personality test, and then they had their closest person to them, usually a spouse or boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever, predict what the person's personality will be like according to the test. Then what they did in the background is they've run thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of people knowing their personality, giving all sorts of information to see if they can predict someone's personality. Their AI predicts the personality better than their spouse.
Wow.
Algorithm.
It's an algorithm. And most everything that you see right now is an algorithm. You can tell on Google, as soon as you type a word, it starts filling in what it thinks you want. Those are all algorithmic, not only just what everybody might want, but what you personally have searched for on Google, what you have done in the past.
So I know a lot of people have this question on their mind. Is the microphone and the smartphone listening to us? Because I think our friend Mark Zuckerberg promised us that it doesn't, or is that smart AI at work having figured us out?
I will say that is an open question right now. I don't dispute that there is some data showing that is what's going on, but that's also counter to what the tech companies tell you. All of them tell you that they're not doing that anymore. And particularly, the ones that put these agents like Alexa in your house, or Siri or whatever. I mean, they're all agents. They're all AI. There's no way of really knowing whether they're importing your data. There's no way of knowing. And if they do import your data, then everything you say, everything you do is part of you. It becomes part of your web presence, for lack of a better term to say.
Right.
Yeah, it's like an alter ego.
Yeah.
Well, in some sense, it is you. It's even better than you, because it's kind of this accumulation of all the things that you look for. And then other people who look for those things, here's what they would be interested in. And then it checks if you're interested, and then the picture just keeps getting bigger and bigger based not only on your activity, but everybody else who does the same activity as you do.
Yeah. Let's
scary, actually, quite honestly.
Yeah, it is. Let's bring COVID into the conversation here. So one of the things that really got me onto this topic, it actually angered me, and I did a TEDx talk about it, was that I read that very young kids, they're either looking at screens or their parents are looking at screens, and they're losing their ability in all of this to read the expressions of their parents. And I even heard that as they're growing up, they could even have less empathy because of that attachment to the screen. With COVID, we're wearing masks a lot, and there's less kind of facial real estate for a kid to read, and actually for all of us to read. How might that affect people?
It's funny. I do a lot of walking with my dog, and I wear a mask when I'm in areas where there are people, and then we walk particularly in areas that there aren't people, and I pull it down. When I have it up and I see somebody and they're doing something nice, like they're putting their mask on, or they're walking across the street, or a cute dog or whatever, I smile at them. But I realize I'm smiling and they're seeing my smile from here up, and this isn't showing smile. Is that a smile, or is that a frown? Can you tell? But what I do find is that
when smile with your eyes, you can smile with. I mean, that's a real smile. Technically, you should with your eyes.
Right, but as I'm walking past somebody, will they notice it from 20 feet away? Will they notice that I'm smiling, or I'm just looking?
That's true. Yeah, that's true.
But the other thing is that when you do take your mask off, you are able to give more cues. You are able to provide more cues, and I think that really helps people understand better. But of course, we're not supposed to take our masks off when we're close to people, so we're kind of in this conundrum spot. And I think what the research is going to show, I'm pretty sure, is that when we get back to realistic life without masks, I don't know when that'll be, 2024, 2023, whatever. When we get into that kind of life, it's going to be odd for all of us, because we are so used to the lack of cues. All of a sudden, we're going to be bombarded by cues. And particularly, as you said, the little kids are in school, they're going to have a problem, they're going to have a real problem because they've learned to try to understand the teacher's moods, the other kids' moods, even their parents' moods from a limited amount of cues. And that is almost always, when you do that, you're almost always wrong.
Wow.
Wow.
So the next generation is going to struggle. It's going to bring different issues, I guess. The whole miscommunication. I mean, we already have that. We were heading towards this, but at least I remember how to, I still have, you know, the information, the memory of it. But like my little sister, she's 19. She's young, and right now she's on lockdown. I'm French, so France is on lockdown, and she's 19. She should be going out, make friends, socialize. It's her youth that is being stolen away, you know, and she will never get that back. She won't have those memories, you know, because that COVID-19 is not going anytime soon. So it's sad. I mean, I just don't even want to. I don't know how we're gonna, how the next generation is going to be able to overcome all this. I mean, I'm.
Well, the interesting thing that people are writing about is there's a couple of things. One is empathy. Empathy is very difficult to dispense virtually. I mean, you can say empathic things. You can say, "Oh, I'm so sorry that happened to you," but am I being serious, or am I just, you know, doing it because it's required of me?
Yeah.
If I were face to face with you and I said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, you're not feeling well," you'd be able to tell by my body language. You know, by my body language would feel encompassing rather than wanting to get away. So it is going to be very difficult when we get back to reality for everybody, for all of us. Even though, like you said, we've got those skills. We learned those a long time ago from birth, basically. Now we're at the point where those skills have not been used and they're rusty. Yeah. And so we have to then figure out how to regain our ability to communicate. One of the things that I've been doing or trying to do over the last year is to schedule regular weekly meetings with people I know well. So I have a weekly happy hour on Saturday afternoons with my best friend of 45 years, 50 years now. And in that case, I get to test stuff out because he knows me super well, obviously. He knows everything about me. And so if I'm talking about something, he can actually tell how I'm feeling about it, and I can tell how he's feeling about it when he's talking. Some of that works. I've got Parkinson's disease, so I have a weekly talk with 3 of my Parkinson's friends, and we're able to talk pretty honestly. But the funny thing is, we just all met live for the first time the other day.
Yeah.
Because we've all been vaccinated, and it was a little stilted. It was a little odd.
Awkward, yeah.
I'd seen one of them face to face. The others were in my boxing class, Parkinson's boxing class, but there were 25 people and I don't remember anybody. But one I'd met face to face for a cup of coffee in between boxing and pandemic. And so I knew what she was like, but one of the people was much more frail than I thought he was, than he would be. He walked much more deliberately. He looked in much more pain than he let on. All I knew is that of all people, all the 4 of us, he spoke the least in our groups. So, but I try to find ways to get that empathy, get that love, get that sharing. It was funny. I had a granddaughter born basically during the pandemic. She's now almost
Corona baby. Corona baby.
Actually, should have named her Corona. Instead, she's Audrey. But
okay.
My daughter is great at this, and she will FaceTime me all the time so that I can see Audrey. And so I got to see Audrey's, growth and everything. And then we made arrangements for all of us to get together during Christmas time. Large, long arrangements. They're in Colorado, we're in San Diego. They came here. We had all these, you can't go into bathrooms unless you hold your breath. You can't open the bathroom door unless you have something in your hand. We went through all of this. You can't stay in an Airbnb unless it's got a 72-hour buffer. All those things. We did a good job. My concern is that Audrey, who knew me from here up, would she get scared if she saw that I was more down, that there was a whole body down there? Would I scare her? And the interesting thing was, I was worried that I would, and in fact, I didn't. And that's because babies react more to your face than anything else.
Right.
Wow.
And I play games with babies all the time. I have 4 kids and 5 grandkids. I start with them when they're very young, and I go like this, and I just keep it there. And then eventually, when they're about 6 months old, they'll go, just sort of
Oh.
creeps out. And then eventually, now that she's 1, she looks at me, she goes, so she's asking me to play the game.
Yeah.
But the only way it worked is because she's limited really to facial expressions. That's what babies rely on, not their body. They don't even understand.
Like a map. Yeah, that's the map, isn't it? Like,
well, and from very beginning, I mean, if you think about nursing mothers, they're holding the baby right here, which is the perfect focal distance for the baby when they're born. So they're playing to their mother's facial expressions all the time.
And all our senses on the face, most of them anyway, the eyes, the smell, the taste, it's all here.
Yep.
So that probably also affects.
Yeah, the other stuff is all real nonverbal. It's like body language and talk this close or this far. It's really complicated, but you're right. Most of the stuff we learn is from our faces.
So what's going to happen to the dating scene post-COVID?
I was waiting for that one.
Talking about this because, okay, you talked about this stilted social skills, but I'm assuming that a lot of folks who are doing online dating have been spending a lot of time on the screen. And how long can you communicate that way without physically meeting? What's the scenario you're seeing up ahead in that regard?
You know, luckily I'm able to compare it because I was on online dating. That's how I met my wife 17 years ago. So we were on the original Match.com. And what we did is we talked for 23 days online through email. It was only email back then. Yeah. We talked through 23 days online before we decided to get together. We thought that was a long time. Now these people are waiting for 6 months, 8 months, a year to get together. And there could be pluses and minuses. And unfortunately, I haven't seen any really good research on this, but I would suspect that one of the pluses is without being face-to-face, you're able to feel a little more free, a little more self-disclosing. In fact, we did some research on online dating and self-disclosure, and there is more self-disclosure going on. Even though they see your face and everything, you talk more about things. You say
more comfortable.
Even in email, when we were writing email, we were much more self-disclosing than we would have been, I think, face-to-face. And so I think online dating can survive. I think it's going to be difficult though, because it's really.
But what about the apps? Because you're talking about Match, where it's still pretty much traditional, slower. And then you go into Tinder, Bumble, where it's all about swipe right, swipe left, and talking about ADD and fast. How is those apps? I mean, do you think those apps affected the new generation on how they process information when it comes to choosing a potential mate?
Yeah, pre-pandemic, I agree with you. Pre-pandemic, it was clearly like that. I mean, when you're making a decision, sort of like the old speed dating, you're making a decision like this about whether you want to swipe left or right.
Based on a picture too. It's a still picture. There's no energy.
And maybe a few words that they wrote about themselves, maybe a few words, or maybe the few that they speak about themselves. It depends on which system you're talking about. It's not enough to go on, obviously. So my suspicion is there'll be a lot of mistakes. There'll be a lot of times when you'll think somebody is a good person that you want to meet, and then nothing like you find because you made assumptions based on their looks, mostly, like you said. Mostly on their looks, maybe a little bit on what they said, but mostly on how they look. I remember once when I was doing Match way back, I was talking to a woman who was a professor of legal professor, a lawyer, and very, very nice emails back and forth, very witty, charming, everything. We decided to meet at a coffee shop for the obligatory 1 hour date, and she couldn't speak a word. She couldn't even pull words together. She was so good at writing her words, but saying them, I wanted to reach my hand into her mouth and yank the words out. They were coming so slowly and so softly. So you just don't know. You just have no idea what you're getting. And you could think it's the love of your life, and you may have talked yourself into that, which then brings other problems. But you certainly are going to make assumptions, which we all do. And most of our
it's a projection.
Yeah, we're going to project See, most of the, thank you for bringing up that word. Most of the stuff we do is we project onto them what we want them to be. And that's
So a lot
not
of a projection.
right. If we
And that's
want
the mistake.
right, if we want them to be empathic and loving, then we project on them and we use all the data we can get that says that they're loving and compassion and empathic, put it all together, but we're making assumptions. And we do this all the time. And our assumptions are usually wrong because we're usually making an assumption about what we want, not what they are.
Yeah. Well.
Yeah.
Speaking of speed dating, we had some rapid fire questions to help our audience get to know Professor Larry Rosen a bit better. And Melissa, do you want to?
All right.
All right. Let's start with the first one. So the first one I have for you, Larry, is be careful to what you're going to say. It's a tricky one, that one. I always start with that one. Who is your favorite actress or actor or both?
My favorite actress or what?
Or actor or both, or you
Actress,
might have,
Actress or actor? Ooh. I love Deborah Winger, but that's because she used to be in my youth group when I was 16 and she was 9.
Wow.
I would probably put her up there just for nostalgia's sake.
Nostalgia.
Favorite actor. It's interesting because my wife and I argue about this all the time. I think Tom Hanks is my favorite actor, and she does not like him. So we tend to have to watch Tom Hanks movies separately. But I really do like. I think he's able to be pretty varied in the way he plays roles. Anyway, that's
versatile. Yeah. And do you have an actress you like? You said Deborah Winger, but yeah, okay, all right. I'm not gonna say anything.
I don't know if you're a wine drinker, but since you're in California, favorite California wine or wine region?
Favorite California wine right now is from the Central Coast, Santa Barbara area. And if I had to pick a real favorite, it's a winery called Byron. Their wines are great. But what I'm drinking these days, I'm not really a wine drinker anyway. What I'm drinking is tequila and mezcal. That's my drink of choice. And interestingly enough, the one I find the best is the company that George Clooney started called Casamigos, which he and 2 friends put in $1 million each, and they sold it for $1 billion a couple of years later. But the tequila they make and the mezcal are both really excellent.
Very good.
Well, check out a tequila called Volcan. My friend Montserrat markets it, and I was drinking a lot of that in Miami Beach pre-pandemic.
How's it spelled? V-O-L?
Volcan, like volcano, but just without the O on it. Yeah, really worth trying to track down.
I will do that.
Okay.
What's that?
Next one, your favorite movie or TV show?
Ooh. Interestingly, because of the number of times I've watched it, I think my favorite movie is Big, with Tom Hanks. My favorite TV show. Can this be of all time?
Of all time.
Hands down, MASH.
Oh, that's an interesting one. Okay. Why is that?
The writing was crisp on that show. The repartee was great. The theme of it was startling, even set within a comedic environment. It was shot near where I used to live in LA, in Topanga Canyon, off of Malibu Canyon, actually. And it was a brilliant show. I mean, it made me laugh, it made me cry, and it's all the criteria you want, right?
Okay. Well, yeah. I have to go back into it now because I forgot about it. MASH. Okay. Michael?
Your favorite app?
Email.
Yeah.
I get they do most of my stuff by email, and as you probably know, Michael, I'm an email junkie. Michael will email me and I'll email him back within a minute and a half.
He does. Amazing.
And part of it is because that's what I grew up with. I mean, I was on email when email wasn't even email, and I got kind of hooked into that kind of communication. I mean, and if you notice, I always try to end all my emails with "all best from San Diego" or "sunny San Diego" or something like that, just to give it a flavor of warmth, a little bit of flavor of
Mm.
caring.
Personal,
Yeah, that's really
personalize
good.
it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay,
Mm.
good.
I get a lot of people right back, by the way, and all best from sunny but icky Heidelberg or something like that.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
nice. I like that.
Alyssa?
Well, talking about destination, what's your favorite travel destination?
Venice, Venice, Italy, not Venice,
Venice.
California.
I was
Venice.
gonna ask. There's two Venice here going on. So Italy. Wow. Okay.
I've been to
That's
Venice
interesting.
about 8 times, I think now.
So what is it in Venice that is captivating you? Is it the gondolas, the romance, the?
You know what? What's in Venice is the fact that you can walk and walk and walk without a map,
Yeah.
because there isn't really a map, and you can go anywhere you can and you won't get lost. The food's great, but you find a restaurant and you may never find it again. I've drawn maps to restaurants that I really liked on my way back to the hotel just so I'd remember. And then every few years, Venice floods, and I was there once during the flood, which was really a kick in the pants when the restaurant you're eating in is all of a sudden flooded underwater.
Okay. I remember it was probably in your class, you said that a good way to stay off of your smartphone is to not take it to bed, spend $10-15 and buy one of those digital electric clocks, and that'll help to keep you off the screen. I was going to ask you, as my last rapid fire question, what's your kind of favorite way to reduce your time on the screen or on social media?
Well, first of all, I don't spend a lot of time on social media at all.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even have an active presence by our definition of any of the social media sites. One of the things that I've done, just because of the research that we've done on sleep, is that even though I take my phone and have it next to me at about an hour to 2 hours before I turn the sound off, so I'm not beeped. And the way I turn the sound off is when I get an email, I go, damn it, turn the sound off. So it may beep a million times. I may get a million emails, but I'm not going to look at them until the next morning. What I don't do is keep it out of the bedroom, because quite honestly, I fall asleep by reading books on my phone. And I watch the Dodger games on my phone.
All right.
So it's sort of a creature of habit, but I don't deal with it. If I get up in the middle of the night, if I get up and I don't even look at the clock to see what time it is.
Good.
If it's dark, it's dark. If it's light, it's light. I just go back to bed or wake up.
Yeah.
Usually the dog tells me what time it is. Time to go out in the morning. You
can always rely on them.
Jumping up
it's
back
funny.
off the bed.
Just a quick anecdote there on dogs. So I was doing a writing sabbatical in Portugal, and my landlady, I think it was her son-in-law, was a dog trainer, and we got talking about smartphones and stuff. And I said, do dogs notice when their owners are walking them and they're looking at their phones? And he goes, you know what? Actually, they don't particularly notice, but they know something is different, because he said, when you walk a dog, that dog expects you to be present, that it's a special moment for them out of the day. And if you're on their phone, they don't feel that kind of energy or whatever from you. It was very interesting.
Yeah, when I walk the dog, I put my earbuds in, special earbuds that don't dangle down because they fall out of my ears. But I put the ones that fit in my ears on. I turn on Amazon Music. I find an album that I haven't heard in a while, and I just let it go.
Yeah.
And then I can pay attention over the music. I can pay attention to the dog. Although paying attention to my dog just means watching him pee in every possible place you can over the next 45 minutes. Even when he has no pee left, he's still trying to pee.
Mark a spot.
Yeah.
His spot seems to be everywhere in my city.
Yeah. So Melissa's got a really big social media presence, and she got some questions from your fans or from your followers, didn't you?
I do. So I have a question from Christian from Atlanta, and he's asking, with 500 million Facebook users being recently hacked, is there any reasonable expectation of privacy on the web?
No, not in the least, quite honestly.
Yeah.
We've noticed more and more times that you're hit with fake news, more and more times that you're hit with scams. I mean, I've been getting like 5 a day now through my text message, through emails, and they're getting more sophisticated. They look more
Oh,
real.
yeah.
I got one the other night. I'm a part of a homeowners association here on the board, and I got one from, looked like it came from my HOA, my management company. And it said, click here to complete the last enrollment in our website so that you can see all the documents that we have. And I thought it was a little weird, so I didn't click. And it turns out that it was somebody had hijacked it and was sending it out. And then when you clicked, it was taking you to a place that it was then releasing something into your system. I think the best thing you have going for you is your brain and some really, really good software. I use Malwarebytes on my Mac.
Which one?
Malwarebytes.
Malware. Oh, I have that one. Yes.
And I use the pro version. I actually pay for it because it does a really good job of checking everything in and out for me. But stuff just creeps in. I mean, my campus has told me that 85% of what email directed to you actually gets thrown away immediately before it even gets close to you, because it's garbage and it's recognizable as garbage. Then another 10% gets put in either a junk or a potential junk folder or potential spam folder or just a quarantine. We have a big quarantine. And you really end up getting maybe 5% of your mail to you.
Which feels a lot already.
Well, and if you think about it, if we didn't do that, then be tons of stuff coming in that would try to get you. And the vulnerable populations, I mean, I'm 71, so I'm part of this vulnerable population. We were just at breakfast, we were just reading from the ARP magazine, and they were talking about how seniors can protect themselves. And it's very difficult because the kinds of ways that they do it are very enticing for an unsuspecting senior.
Yeah.
And
it's manipulation, cyber attack, manipulation, like constant. They know also your age, range, what you're looking. I mean, they have like spyware combined with very good, smart way of manipulation. Good combo, I mean, I fall for certain things sometimes. I'm looking at it, I'm like,
that looks interesting. Maybe I do want that person.
Maybe,
that person, it goes off to some place that's going to scam your money. Yeah.
Or maybe I won the lottery. I'm like, what if I did? And
I've been getting ones. You placed 3rd place in an Amazon contest. Click here for your prize. Now, why not 1st place? First of all, why 3rd place? Somebody decided 3rd place looked less scary. But the answer really is no. We're never private. We're not going to be private. I'm sorry.
Well, at least you're not getting the Russian wives. I don't know why, but I'm getting Russian male wives telling me how, they're long emails. And I'm like, why am I getting this?
You've got to be more careful what sites you visit.
Yeah, probably.
Excuse me.
Who knows? Even if you accidentally visit a site someplace, you're not on somebody's list.
Yeah.
That's scary. But
wow,
we're learning. I mean, we're trying to learn. We try to teach people. I try to teach my mother. She gave away her computer because she had so much trouble with it. She just gave it away.
Oh, you have to be extremely careful. So shall we go on the second question?
Yep.
Sure, I love this question.
Do you want to, Michael, do you want to go? Or
sure.
you have it?
So this is from George in New York. Do you think that social media is creating more of a divide amongst people rather than its original intention to bring people closer?
That's a very good question.
Yes.
Thank you. I'd have to say both. I think because of the pandemic, it is bringing people closer. And I think pretty much, I think people will agree that they have connected more to people, with using the word connected, not communicate, but connected more to people during the pandemic than before. Because I mean, you're home all day, right? And you got time in between your meetings, and even during your meetings, you can connect with somebody on email. If I suddenly look like this and turn this way, I'm typing on my email. I think that in the long run, it's a wait and see. I don't think there's an easy answer to this. I do think that we're going to have to develop different strategies of how to deal with everyday situations that we didn't really think were going to be difficult. now turn out to be difficult.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Well, actually, I have a question also. Since you're bringing it, it's more like funny, but you know, like since I am in the entertainment world, and so I've been in sci-fi, and there's two movies that comes up a lot when I was reading about you, and I went on your website, I checked your videos, and two movies that came up, The Matrix and Terminator. So those two movies are science fiction, but my question here is how close, and I know it sounds, you know, crazy, but how close are we potentially to have, first of all, to be plugged in? I think to some extent we are, you know, because those phone is the matrix, you know, all this is the matrix is not what we see, it's what we're surrounded by. But also how close are we to, is it possible to lose control over AI and you know, like in Terminator? I mean, are those visionary movies, or what's your take on this?
So AI is really in its infancy. There's some, you know, there was always this idea that AI would allow us flexibility and freedom. We'd have some AI come clean the house, take our messages for us, cook us dinner. It's nowhere near that. I do think it's going to take another, I mean, I'm part of a group that studies this stuff. I think it's going to take another decade or more for it to even approach what we thought it should look like. I think it's funny when you ask about sort of the reality of all this and are we close to that reality. When I was a kid, I used to read a series of books called Tom Swift. Tom Swift was a teenager who, there was also a series about his father coming before him, but these were in the 50s. He was a teenager, and every book, there are 30 some odd books in the original set, every book he invented things. And I just reread one, I periodically reread them just for fun. I just reread one from 1953 or 4 where he invented Wi-Fi. He was stuck on a desert island. He figured out how he could put some metal together. I don't know what he's doing, but I'm not a scientist that way, but he was able to do it and put it together. So we've been talking about this stuff for a long time. And if you really want to go back and see the kinds of things that we could or could not have, Philip Dick is one of the best writers, and many of his books have obviously become very famous movies. I think you can look and see where his thinking was, but it's still way out there compared to some.
It's interesting what was sci-fi could potentially happen. I mean, all the pandemic movies that were made like 10 years ago, you know, about a virus wiping out, you know, and they were actually putting all those on Netflix just when the pandemic was happening. And I'm like watching them and I'm thinking, hang on a second here. You know, everybody went a little bit cuckoo, you know, because of what was going on and, you know, acting out. And people were like, there were a lot of thought about, did they actually knew that that could happen? Or was it collective consciousness that somehow we have all those information stored and creatively we are expressing them and then they just happen, you know? And The Matrix, for instance, I mean, this is complex kind of movie, but there's a lot of science behind it. You know, there's creativity, there's also a lot of, you know, obviously research. And it's like, are we plugging ourselves are we relinquishing our, you know, authority to AI because, you know, it's easier, or because we're lazy, or because or maybe there's, you know, an agenda? I don't know, who knows, you know, but
well,
I don't know.
When AI works for us, we love it. I mean,
I have a robot right now that cleans for me. I mean, you know, there's round little things. I'm sitting there going, yeah, go.
During the pandemic, I love my Roomba. It cleaned every day, upstairs and downstairs.
I have a Goofy. Goofy is nicer.
Yeah.
Goofy is goofy, makes you laugh. Goofy loves hitting you. It doesn't recognize legs. It thinks you are a big piece of bread or something, and it comes and hits you. And it hits all my guests. So I don't put Goofy anymore when I have guests at home. But
I do.
Yeah. But it's funny.
You know, some of that stuff has been around for a while, and it's funny when you mention plugging in on the Matrix. I read a book, and I wish I could remember the title of it, but I read a book probably 25 years ago about people being able to take this thing from their brain and screw it into something on the wall, and they'd be in what they call the net at that point. And this was well before the internet. It was well before any hint of AI. So people have been talking about this stuff forever. Science, I used to read a lot of science fiction. I mean, they've been talking about things, and now science fiction, some of it has become science fact.
Yeah, one of the previous guests of Global Impact, Jennifer Ju Scott out of Hong Kong, she was saying, well, don't always look at AI as a bad thing, because she said it could help us predict the next pandemic. It could help us come up with the next vaccine to save our lives. Could do a whole bunch of things to help protect humanity. So hopefully that will come to pass.
Fingers.
There is one other quick thing here. Out of the listener questions, and then we're gonna, I think, start and wrap it up. We don't want to take too much of your time, but Melissa and I were talking yesterday about GPS and how that helps us navigate. But meanwhile, that part of our brains that does navigation seems to have gotten really lazy. And don't even get me started about the memory. But from New York also, so is all this technology making people lazier and creating instant gratification, zero patience monsters?
Well, that's like 5 questions all rolled into one.
I know. Yeah.
I'll take the delayed gratification one because that's the easiest.
Yeah.
If you remember the marshmallow study way back in Walter Mischel back in the 60s and 70s, kids were given one marshmallow and told if they could wait 10 minutes, they could either eat it anytime they wanted, or if they wait 10 minutes, they got a second one. They could eat both of them. Well, 33% were able to do that. These are 4 and 5-year-old kids. 33% were able to do that. And then they tracked them years and years later and found that those who were able to delay gratification had higher educational attainment, had lower body mass index. They were able to delay the gratification of food. Their prefrontal cortex worked better, which is their executive controller, which is controlling impulsivity and things like that. They had positives from that one experience because it labeled them as able to delay gratification. The rest of that, which part of that question would you like me to tackle first? Because there's so many pieces.
How about the we're losing part of our abilities to remember things, navigate, that sort of stuff?
My argument would be when the printing press came out, people worried that it would get in the way of people telling their social history to their family and putting it that way and writing it down in the Bibles and things like that. I always use the example of calculators. When calculators came out, scientists were appalled. This is going to take our ability to do math. These kids won't want to do math anymore. It's too easy. Our abilities to do math are just the same.
It hasn't impacted us at all. Like it's not affecting.
Nope.
Okay.
Nope. But the interesting thing is,
good to know.
You have to wait a while to see. I mean, using GPS could cause potential problems. I mean, as we've seen, GPS is not perfect, and it takes you sometimes the wrong way, out of the way, in a different way. I just think that it may be a skill that, as GPS gets better, may be a skill that we no longer need. Maybe just a skill we don't need. Handwriting is another good example, by the way.
Yeah.
Every kid, I'm sure you guys learned handwriting when you were
yes.
in America.
I still have a pen, but it gives me, I have cramps.
Right. In the US, it's like 2nd and 3rd grade. And so it's like 7 and 8 years old. They used to learn handwriting. And it was very important. I remember my kids, I have 4 kids. And I remember my kids coming, with this special paper that had a little line down the middle between each one. And you had to have the sweep and the tail and all this stuff done correctly. Do we need handwriting anymore? I figure the only thing you need to handwrite is your signature.
Right.
That's it.
And even that's becoming digital in some cases.
Well, yeah, you're right. Because I signed something, a lot of documents digital.
Electronic.
Handwriting's like this anyway. It's just a scrawl.
Right. Yeah.
I got a D in handwriting in 4th grade, and it's not gotten any better.
Okay. I think Melissa and I would be scolded by our audience if we didn't leave you by asking maybe your 2 or 3 best tips to help folks cut down on their screen time or social media. Now, we have to recognize that a lot of screen time now is kind of involuntary. We have to do it for work. And as you talked about connecting with good friends, stuff like that, what top of your head, your top 2 or 3 best pieces of advice?
Okay, so number one is our attention span has sunk to the lowest ever. And we need to build up our attention span. I always advocate what I call technology breaks or tech breaks to do this, where you basically start with the idea that you want to learn to study for 15 minutes without interruption. And so you take your phone, you set it for a minute, you give yourself a minute to look at this screen, my phone screen, my tablet screen, whatever's around me, 1 minute only. And then you get rid of everything that you don't need for studying or for work. And you don't just minimize them, you get rid of them. You close them down, because if you minimize them, they stay at the bottom of the screen, right? And poking at you, and particularly with the numbers that you've missed. Then you set it for 15 minutes, and you work for 15 minutes. You put the phone right in front of you, but upside down. The upside down part stops you from seeing the flashing. Right in front of you is a signal of your brain saying, you'll get to see me in 15 minutes or less. Hang in there. Let's just work. So you get this person working for 15, then a 1 minute break, working for 15, a 1 minute break, working for 15, a 1 minute break, until the 15 alarm goes off, and the person says, wait a minute, I'm right in the middle of this paragraph, or I'm right in the middle of this problem. That's when you know they've got it. Then you jump it up to 20 minutes.
Isn't that like a concept, the Pomodoro?
Very much like the Pomodoro,
Is that
yes.
the similar? Okay, yeah.
It's very similar to the Pomodoro, except the Pomodoro, I think, is 20 minutes.
20 minutes.
20, yeah. 20, it's an odd number, like 24 minutes or something weird like that.
25, I think.
Yeah,
something weird.
It's the same principle. It's the same exact principle. I just think we have to build it up slowly. Most research finds that our attention span is about 3 to 6 minutes. All of us, kids, adults, everybody. And so that's my first suggestion, is we've got to build that up.
Okay.
Second suggestion has to do with sleep, which is all important. We are ruining our brains by using our devices at night in our bed. I didn't used to believe that, but I believe it strongly now, because what happens at night while we're sleeping is that our brain does, for lack of anything better, housekeeping. It finds stuff that it learned that day, and it enhances it, and it practices it and puts it into memory. It finds stuff that it learned that day that it doesn't need anymore, like I don't need to remember that your shirt was purple or lavender or whatever color that is. It just lops it off, it prunes it away. But the most important thing it does is during the day, your brain uses chemicals, but it doesn't use the whole chemical, it uses parts of it. And so the parts it doesn't need, it just throws out in the middle of your brain, just free floating around in the brain fluid. At night, if you have a good night's sleep, if you're well rested, in general, your spinal column opens just a little bit more. It acts like a bidet, flushes spinal fluid up, gets all of those things in and puts them in your spinal cord and gets rid of them. If you don't get a good night's sleep and you're not a good sleeper, what happens is that many of those particles, many of those molecules are called beta amyloids. And if you know anything about research on Alzheimer's, beta amyloids, when there are many of them, start clumping together to form plaque. And if you look at the brains of Alzheimer's patients after they've passed away, you will see a ton of plaque in their brains. They think that plaque is responsible for our lack of learning, for our memory failures. So clearly number two is, how can we stop that from happening? One way is to get a real strong sleep habit. You go to bed about the same time, you get up about the same time, but that's not enough. What you need to do is to recognize that certain things get in the way of sleep. For example, one of the things we know is that somewhere when it starts to turn a little bit dusky, it's not sunny anymore, your brain starts, the pineal gland starts leaking melatonin. And it slowly leaks melatonin over the day, over the evening, until you go and fall asleep. Problem is that if you're looking at any LED-based technology close to your face, that would be a smartphone, close to your face, what happens is the blue light coming from there, and it's primarily blue light, it looks white, but it's primarily blue light. The blue light coming from there stimulates the adrenal gland to put cortisol out, and cortisol wakes us up and turns off the melatonin at the same time. So we may fall asleep, but we may wake up 5 times at night because our brain still has this kind of lack of melatonin, excessive cortisol going on, and it also doesn't allow all those good housekeeping things to go.
Well, that's interesting because there's an app for this called Sleep Cycle, which actually show you throughout your whole sleep. I don't know if you're using it, which I'm a lot about sleep. I totally agree with you. Sleep is everything. When your brain regenerates and all your organs, and we unfortunately we always had that thought that 8 hours of sleep was, it's about the time, which is not. It's about the quality of sleep you're getting, because you could be sleeping 8 hours, which happens, and sometimes you wake up and you're still extremely tired, and could sleep 3 hours, and you feel like totally awake and productive. So the quality is everything, and it's interesting because I just, you talking about melatonin and all these hormones now makes sense. It's not so much about the amount, it's the quality and how to enhance that.
Exactly.
Yeah, I take melatonin sometimes, but the supplements, but I'm not sure if it's any good.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure it does anything either, but I can fall asleep anywhere, anytime, so it doesn't really matter.
You can. You're good at sleeping.
We have the bed that the back raises up, and the light behind is still on, and it's raised up, and the TV's on, and I'm sound asleep. So. And then the last thing, you asked me for 3, right?
Yes.
So the third one has to do with understanding your daily behavior. And I encourage people, if you have an iPhone, to look at screen time. It's very easy. It alerts you every day how many hours and minutes you've been on the day before. Look at it and pay attention to it. Keep track of where you are most likely to go, and ask yourself, do I really need to be going to Instagram 8 times a day for 35 minutes each time? Or can I do other things that are more productive? And same thing with, if you have an Android phone, it's called digital well-being. It's the same exact kind of data. The other thing to look at there, by the way, is when you unlock your phone, where is the most likely place that you go first? See, mine is email, of course, as I've said, but people who think they don't do very much social media find that they open it up and the first thing they do is go to a social media site.
Yeah.
And so just keep track of things. They're giving you lots of data. I'm very data bound anyway. I really believe in collecting data. You can collect data on yourself. Keep a chart. What are, how much time are you spending on this app, and then you have to ask yourself, is that worthwhile? The other thing is, it may be difficult for you to change that behavior. So I encourage you to hide your apps, your communication apps.
Yeah.
Just stick them in a folder and stick them each on a different page. Just hide them.
Make it hard to,
just hide them inside of a folder. A couple of them here, a couple of them there. And that means you have to go look for them.
So thank you very, very much. I wanted on behalf of Melissa and myself, to thank our audience for listening, and to, as we always do, remind you to, we were talking about technology, use that technology to reach out to people who may be on the other side of the earth or down the block, to just check in with them, see if they're okay during these lockdowns, during the pandemic. A lot of lonely people out there, but a lot of people who have a lot of anxiety, close to the end of their rope in terms of hope. So pick up, even if it's 1 or 2 minutes a day, just do it. We'd also like to give our heartfelt thanks to the Tarashchenko Foundation, which does support this podcast in partially. And we will look forward to welcoming you all back for the next podcast episode. So thank you again, Larry. Thank you, Melissa.